There's a special kind of silence that follows a death. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It's the sound of questions that will never be answered, of conversations you'll never finish. I was standing in that silence, in my father's study, the smell of old books and his cologne still lingering in the air, and I was holding a piece of paper that felt like a bomb. My name is Clara. Until that moment, I believed I was Charles Whitmore's daughter. I believed that family, however messy, was a bond that couldn't be broken by a legal document. I was about to learn how wrong I was. The funeral was over. The black clothes were put away. The casseroles from neighbors had stopped coming. Now it was just business, legal business. My father's lawyer, Mr. Alden, a man who had known me since I was in pigtails, had asked to see me alone. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. He just slid a single document across my father's vast, polished desk. "This is a copy of the final executed will," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "You should read it." My heart wasn't even pounding. It felt still, frozen. Because somehow, in the pit of my stomach, I already knew. I scanned the legalese, looking for my name, looking for the words, "my daughter." I saw my older brother, Michael's name. His inheritance was outlined in detailed, generous paragraphs. I saw bequests to charities, to the housekeeper who'd been with us for 20 years. I saw the trust for my cousin's children. But my name, Clara Whitmore, was nowhere. It was as if I had been deleted, a typo corrected, a line item removed from the final draft of my father's life. I looked up at Mr. Alden. The room seemed to tilt. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Your father, he made amendments 6 months ago. He was of sound mind. I advised him, but he was very clear." "Clear about what?" I whispered. "That you were to receive nothing. The estate, the house, the investments, the controlling shares in the family company, all to Michael. A small, separate trust was established for you. It provides a basic, modest annual sum for essentials." A modest sum for essentials, like I was a distant, problematic relative, not my only daughter. The betrayal wasn't in the money. Let me be clear about that from the start. The betrayal was in the act, the silent, surgical, premeditated act of removal. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't confronted me, he had simply erased me, without a word, without a fight, without even giving me a chance to understand why. I felt a hot, sharp pain behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not here, not in front of this man, in this room that still felt like my father's. I stood up, the leather chair groaning behind me. "Did he—" My voice broke. I forced it steady. "Did he leave a letter? An explanation?" Mr. Alden's gaze dropped to his hands. "No letter. Just the legal directive." And that was it, the final insult. Not just to disinherit me, but to offer no reason, to let me stand there in the wreckage of our relationship and have to guess what final, terrible thing I had done to deserve this. I walked out of that house, the house I grew up in, the house I thought I might one day raise my own children in, and I felt like a ghost. I was no longer Clara, his daughter. I was a footnote, a modest sum for essentials. But as I drove away, the numbness began to crack, and beneath it something else began to stir. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a cold, hard, furious need for an answer. He thought he could have the last word by having no words at all, but I was just getting started. This is the story of how I uncovered the truth my father took to his grave, and why that truth shocked me to my very core,
and changed everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. To understand the depth of the cut, you have to understand the family portrait. From the outside, we were the perfect image. Charles Whitmore, my father, self-made, formidable, a titan of industry. My mother, Eleanor, the elegant, charitable heart of the family who passed away when I was 15. And then there was us, the children. Michael, the golden child, older by 4 years. He was my father's shadow from the moment he could walk. He studied business, not because he loved it, but because it was the family script. He joined the company right out of college, his ascent smooth, predictable, blessed by my father's approving nods. Michael was solid, unquestioning. He mirrored my father's opinions, adopted his style, married a woman from a suitable family. He was the heir apparent in every sense. And then there was me, Clara. I was different, they said. I had my mother's curiosity, her love for art, for stories, for things that had no clear balance sheet value. While Michael and my father discussed mergers, I was in the library, lost in novels. While they played golf, I was taking photographs in the garden. I was never rebellious in a loud way. I didn't get tattoos or crash cars. My rebellion was quiet. It was in choosing to study art history instead of finance. It was in moving into a small apartment in the city to work as a curator for a modest art gallery instead of taking a vice presidency at Whitmore Industries.
My father never yelled. His disapproval was a much colder thing. A raised eyebrow over dinner, a sigh when I mentioned my work, a comment like, "It's charming you have a hobby, Clara, but one must think of the future." I was the afterthought, the whimsical, impractical daughter. But here's the crucial part, the part I clung to in the dark after the will was read. There was still love, or so I believed. He came to my gallery opening, standing stiffly in the corner, but he came. He framed a photo I took of the old oak tree by the lake house. On my birthdays, he'd give me extravagant, impersonal gifts, a piece of jewelry that was too formal, a check that felt like a transaction. But he remembered. Our relationship was a series of quiet distances and occasional fragile bridges. I thought it was just us. I thought that underneath his disappointment, I was still his daughter, that at the end of the day, blood meant something. The will proved me devastatingly wrong. In the weeks after the meeting with Mr. Alden, I was adrift. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was a cyclone of why. Was it because I didn't join the company? Because I wasn't like Michael? Was I somehow a disappointment so profound that I deserved to be wiped from his legacy? I tried to talk to Michael. He met me for coffee, his manner somber, but there was a new weight to him, the weight of being the sole heir. "Clara, I'm as shocked as you are," he said, but his eyes didn't quite match the words. There was a guardedness there. He never said a thing to me. The lawyers handled it. That trust he set up, it's generous for what it is. You won't want for anything. "I don't want the trust, Michael," I hissed, keeping my voice low. "I want to know why. Did he say anything to you in those last months? Anything at all?" Michael stirred his espresso, a faint clink of porcelain. He was under a lot of stress, the business, his health. He became secretive, paranoid almost. He kept saying he needed to protect the legacy. I assumed he meant from market forces, not from you. Protect the legacy from you. The words hung in the air, poisonously. "So you think I was a threat to his legacy?" My voice was trembling. "I didn't say that," Michael said quickly, but the implication was clear. "Look, the will is legal. It's done. Fighting it would be ugly, expensive, and you'd lose. It's what he wanted. We have to respect that." We. He said we. He was already on the other side of a line I didn't even know had been drawn, the heir and the erased. That conversation was the end of my grief. The confusion and hurt hardened into a single, focused determination.
This wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. My father thought his secret, the reason for this ultimate rejection, died with him. Michael wanted me to accept it and move on, but I couldn't live as a ghost in my own life. If my father wanted to protect his legacy from me, I needed to know what that legacy truly was, and I was about to go digging in places I was never meant to see. My father's house, now Michael's house, was like a fortress, a beautiful, silent fortress filled with memories that now felt like lies. I couldn't just walk in and start rifling through his papers. Michael had changed the security codes. But I remembered something, a secret from my childhood. When I was about 10, I loved to hide in my father's study. He was often traveling, and the huge, quiet room felt like a kingdom of secrets. One day, I found a loose panel at the back of one of the lower bookshelves. Behind it was a small, dark space, my childhood treasure trove. I'd hide little trinkets there, a shiny rock, a friendship bracelet. I showed it to my father once, expecting him to be angry. He just smiled, a rare, quiet smile, and said, "Every good library needs a secret, Clara, but this one is ours. Don't tell your brother." Don't tell your brother. I never did. After my coffee with Michael, a desperate idea took root. Was it still there? Could I get into the house? Michael and his wife were leaving for a week-long trip to settle some of the estate business with our father's partners in Switzerland. The house would be empty except for the bi-weekly cleaners. The day after they left, I drove to the family home. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. This felt wrong. It felt like breaking and entering into my own past. Using the code my father had before he changed it, my mother's birthday, didn't work on the front gate, as I'd feared. But there was an old, overgrown path through the back woods that led to a secondary gate near the gardener shed. That gate was never connected to the main electronic system. It was secured by an old, heavy physical padlock. I parked a mile down the road and walked through the woods in the gathering dusk, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every cracking twig sounded like a gunshot. When I reached the gate, I saw the old padlock, rusted but still secure. For a moment, I felt defeated. But then I remembered the rock. The third post along the fence line near the base had a hollow spot behind a loose stone. My father kept a spare key there for the groundskeepers years ago. I knelt, my fingers digging in the cold dirt, feeling for the stone. It was still loose. I pulled it out, reached into the damp darkness, and my fingers closed on cold, jagged metal.
The key. It was still there. The lock clicked open with a heavy, metallic groan that was far too loud in the silent woods. I slipped through, closing the gate quietly behind me. The house loomed ahead, dark except for a single security light. I didn't head for the doors. I went to the study's French windows. The lock on one was finicky. If you jiggled the handle just right, it would pop open. Another childhood secret. I jiggled, I pressed. For a terrifying minute, nothing happened. Had Michael fixed it? Then, with a soft click, the latch gave way. The smell hit me first. Leather, wood polish, faint cigar smoke. It was exactly as he'd left it. I didn't turn on the lights. I used the small flashlight on my phone, its beam cutting through the dusty air. I went straight to the bookshelf, the panel. I ran my fingers along the ornate wooden trim, feeling for the slight unevenness. There. I pressed. It gave, swinging inward silently. The space wasn't empty. My childhood trinkets were gone. In their place was a simple, letter-sized manila envelope. No label. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled it out. It was thick. I sat on the floor, my back against the bookshelf, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was paperwork. Photocopies of financial statements, bank transfers, and legal filings from decades ago. The names were redacted with thick black marker, but the amounts were staggering. Millions moving between shell companies with names I didn't recognize. There were also pages of handwritten notes in my father's distinct, sharp script. Phrases jumped out: cover the trail, liability, silence required. And one phrase circled that made my blood run cold:
the Geneva account. At the very bottom of the stack was a single, unredacted document. It was a birth certificate for a baby girl, born to a woman named Isabelle Duval in Geneva, Switzerland, 28 years ago. The father's name was blank, but the date of birth, it was exactly 1 week before my own birthday. I stared at that document, the beam of my flashlight shaking. What was this? Was this my father's secret? A child he had with another woman? Was that the threat to his legacy? A hidden heir? But then I looked at the financials again, the dates, the huge sums moving out of the company around that same time, 28 years ago. This wasn't just about a hidden child. This was about money, a lot of money, and a cover-up. I didn't understand it yet, but I knew one thing. I had found the first thread, and I was going to pull it until the whole tapestry of my father's perfect legacy unraveled. I took photos of every single page with my phone. Then I carefully placed the envelope back in its hiding spot, exactly as I found it. I wasn't Clara, the erased daughter, anymore. I was Clara, the seeker, and I had just found the map to a buried truth. For 3 days, I did nothing but stare at the photos on my phone, the birth certificate, the redacted financials, my father's frantic notes. The name Isabelle Duval played on a loop in my mind. Geneva. It felt like a puzzle where I only had the corner pieces. I needed context. I needed someone who knew my father back then, before he was the formidable Charles Whitmore, before my mother, before the polished corporate legacy. There was only one person left who might talk to me, my Aunt Gabrielle, my father's younger sister. She was the family's black sheep, an artist who lived in a cluttered coastal cottage, the one who always squeezed my hand too tight at holidays and whispered, "Don't let them sand down your edges, Clara." She and my father had a famous decade-long feud. No one ever told me what it was about. Business differences was all Michael would ever say. I drove to the coast. Gabrielle's cottage was exactly as I remembered. Wind-beaten shingles, the smell of salt and oil paint. She opened the door before I could knock, her eyes wide with surprise and immediate concern. She looked older, her blonde hair streaked with gray and tied in a messy bun, but her gaze was as sharp as ever. "Clara, I heard," she said, her voice soft. She pulled me into a hug that felt like solid ground. "Come in. The kettle's just boiled." Inside, surrounded by her vibrant, chaotic seascapes, I felt the performative stiffness of the family mansion melt away. I didn't know how to begin, so I just handed her my phone, open to the photo of the birth certificate. "I found this, hidden in his study. I was cut out of the will, Aunt Gabby, and I think this is why." She took the phone, her expression shifting from curiosity to deep, pained recognition as she read. She didn't seem shocked. She seemed resigned. She handed the phone back and sank into a worn armchair, staring at the crackling fire in her hearth. "Isabelle Duval," she whispered, the name a sigh. "I haven't heard that name in 30 years. I prayed you'd never have to." "Who was she?" I asked, kneeling on the rug beside her chair. "Was she his mistress? Do I have a half-sister out there?" Gabrielle looked at me, her eyes brimming with a sadness so profound it stole my breath. "Oh, my dear girl, no. Isabelle Duval wasn't his mistress." She paused, gathering herself. "She was his business partner, and his greatest mistake." The story she told me then shattered the foundational myth of my family. In his late 20s, my father wasn't the titan yet. He was hungry, brilliant, and ruthless. He went to Geneva to broker a massive, exclusive distribution deal for a new kind of manufacturing technology. It was the deal that would launch Whitmore Industries into the stratosphere. Isabelle Duval was the Swiss lawyer representing the other side. She was formidable, sharper than anyone he'd ever met. They struck up a fierce professional respect, which, during long nights of negotiation, turned into something more. "It was a brief, intense affair," Gabrielle said, "but it ended when the deal did. He came home, met your mother, and never looked back, or so we all thought."
Years later, when I was a baby and Michael was 4, a letter arrived from Isabel. She was dying, and she had a daughter, a little girl born 7 months after my father left Geneva. She had never told him. She hadn't wanted anything from him, she wrote, but now, facing the end, she had to. The child, Ilara, needed medical care, expensive, long-term care. She was enclosing the birth certificate. The father's line was blank, but a paternity test could be arranged. "Your father was terrified," Gabrielle said, her voice low, not of the child, but of the scandal. This was the era of family values branding, a secret love child from a business trip with a dying mother demanding support. It could have sunk the company's reputation and a major merger he was engineering. Your mother had just been diagnosed with her illness. He couldn't bear to hurt her with this. So he made a deal, but not a compassionate one, a business one. He sent a lawyer, not poor conflicted Mr. Alden, a different, ruthless man, to Geneva. He offered a single, massive lump sum payment, millions, enough to cover all medical care for life. But in exchange, Isabel had to sign the most ironclad non-disclosure agreement imaginable. She had to legally state she had fabricated the paternity claim. She had to change the child's surname, and she and her daughter would forever relinquish any claim to him, his name, or his estate. It was a purchase of silence, a payoff. I felt sick. He paid them off to disappear? He thought he was protecting his family, his company, his legacy, Gabrielle said, but her tone was hollow. I found out about it by accident, seeing a bank transfer I shouldn't have. I confronted him. We had a screaming row. I told him it was cowardly, that blood was blood, that he had a responsibility. He told me I was a sentimental fool who didn't understand the realities of building an empire. He said he was protecting you and Michael and your mother from a messy, painful scandal. That was the last real conversation we ever had. I thought of the financial records I'd seen, the huge sums, the shell companies. "The Geneva account," I breathed. Gabrielle nodded. That's what he called it in his private ledger, the guilt account. But Clara, listen to me. This is where it gets worse. The payments, they didn't stop when the little girl, Ilara, came of age, or even when Isabel died, which she did just a few years later. The statements you saw, the recent ones, those were ongoing payments for decades. My mind reeled. Why, if it was a lump sum for medical care? That's what I never understood, unless, Gabrielle leaned forward, her hand gripping mine, it wasn't just a payoff, unless it was blackmail. The word hung in the cozy room like a thunderclap. "Someone," she whispered, "has been using that secret to drain money from your father's company for a very, very long time. And 6 months ago, he finally decided to stop it, or someone made him a final, devastating threat related to it. A threat so big he rewrote his will. He needed to protect the legacy, not from me, the art historian, but from a scandal so old and deep it could still destroy everything. By disinheriting me, was he cutting me off from the toxic fallout, or was he protecting the legacy for someone else?" I left my aunt's cottage with a new, chilling clarity. The secret wasn't just a hidden child, it was a hidden war. And I was no longer just searching for an answer. I was walking directly onto a battlefield. Back in my apartment, the puzzle pieces started to form a horrifying picture. My father wasn't a cruel man cutting off his disappointing daughter. He was a man under siege. The Geneva account was a leak, a constant, secret drain on the company. Someone knew about Ilara Duval and was using her existence as a weapon. But who? Isabel was dead. Ilara herself? According to the original deal, she'd have no legal claim and would be in breach of an NDA. It would be a huge risk for her.
A business rival? Maybe, but how would they have found out? The only people who knew were my father, his old ruthless lawyer who died years ago, Aunt Gabrielle, and my mother. My mother. The thought was a physical ache. She was the victim in my father's story, protected from a painful truth. But what if she'd found out? What if her illness, her sadness in those final years, wasn't just from sickness? I pushed the thought away. It was too painful. I needed to follow the money. The financial records I'd photographed were cryptic, but they had routing numbers, bank codes, and the names of those shell companies. Helvetia Holdings, Alpine Trust. I spent nights I should have been sleeping at my kitchen table, my laptop glowing, falling down internet rabbit holes about offshore accounts and corporate tracing.
I was an art curator, not a forensic accountant. I was in over my head. I needed help. But who could I trust? Mr. Alden was loyal to my father's estate, which now meant Michael. Michael, his words echoed. He needed to protect the legacy. Did Michael know? Was that his guarded secret over coffee? A reckless idea formed. If this was a secret war, I needed an ally my father would have never approved of. I needed a hacker. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't thinking about legality anymore. I was thinking about survival, about truth. Through a friend of a friend who worked in cybersecurity, I was put in touch with someone known only as Leo. Our communication was via encrypted app. I provided the details from the documents, the shell company names, the bank routing numbers. I asked one question: find the ultimate beneficiary. Who is the money flowing to right now? A week of nerve-wracking silence followed. Then a file arrived. It wasn't a name, it was another layer of the onion. The money from Helvetia Holdings flowed to a trust in the Cayman Islands. That trust paid out to a private foundation in Liechtenstein. That foundation made regular disbursements to a corporate entity in Delaware, a Russian doll of secrecy. But Leo had attached a note. The Delaware Corp has one director/officer on public file, a law firm, Vance and Crux LLC. The lead attorney signing the annual docs is a James Corvin. James Corvin. The name meant nothing to me. I typed it into a search engine. The first result was a professional profile. He was a partner at Vance and Crux. His specialty, estate law, legacy planning, and high net worth family governance. And his profile picture showed a man in his late 50s with a sharp smile and cold, familiar eyes. I had seen him before, at my father's funeral, standing at the back in a perfectly tailored black coat. I had assumed he was a business associate. He had caught my eye and given me a small, solemn nod, which I had numbly returned. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a ghost from Geneva. This was a vulture in a suit, circling my family from the inside. My father's will had been amended 6 months ago by Mr. Alden's firm. But what if James Corvin had been consulted? What if he had influenced it? I needed to see the official will filing at the courthouse. It would list the attorneys involved. The next morning, I filed into the cold, echoing probate records room. I requested the file for Charles Whitmore. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was, the will, and the attached certificate of independent legal advice, signed by the attorney who witnessed the amendments. The signature was clear: James Corvin. He wasn't just a bystander, he was the architect. But why? What did he have to gain from me being disinherited? As I scrolled, I saw another document, an invoice from Vance and Crux to the estate of Charles Whitmore for ongoing legacy protection services. The fee was astronomical, and it was authorized for payment by the executor of the estate. The executor was my brother, Michael. A connection snapped into place with such force I almost dropped the file. The ongoing blackmail payments from the Geneva account, the exorbitant fees to Corvin's firm, Michael as the sole heir, now controlling all the assets and authorizing payments. Was it possible? Was my own brother involved? Was he the one being blackmailed, or was he the one benefiting from the blackmail?
The world narrowed to a pinprick of cold, clarifying rage. This wasn't about my father's disappointment. This was a financial takeover. They had used my father's oldest, darkest secret as a lever to manipulate him, and when he finally tried to resist, they ensured the entire empire fell into the hands of the one person they could control, Michael, and they had cut out the one person who might ask too many questions, me. I had been erased not because I was unworthy, but because I was an obstacle, a loose end. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. The grief was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was a cold, steel purpose. They thought erasing me from a piece of paper made me powerless. They were wrong. It made me invisible. And you can see a lot from the shadows. Confronting Michael or James Corvin directly would be a mistake. They had the law, the money, and the prepared lies on their side. I had a suspicion and a burning sense of injustice. I needed proof, not of the old Geneva secret, but of the current conspiracy. I needed to connect Michael to the blackmail payments, to Corvin's fees, in a way that couldn't be explained away. I thought about the money trail Leo had uncovered. It was designed to be opaque, but every financial crime leaves a human footprint. Someone had to set up those accounts. Someone had to manage the transfers. James Corvin was the architect, but he wouldn't do the data entry himself. I needed someone inside Vance and Crux. It was a crazy long shot, but I remembered something from the probate trial. The invoice had a billing coordinator's name on it, S. Reyes. A quick LinkedIn search showed a Sophia Reyes who worked at Vance & Crux as a senior legal administrator and billing specialist. Her profile was professional, but her few public posts were revealing. She shared articles about workplace equality, ethical business practices, and once a poignant quote about the cost of silencing your conscience for a paycheck.
She was a potential crack in the wall, but how to approach her? A direct message would be traced. Showing up at her office was insane. Then I had an idea, an art world idea. Vance & Crux was having a lavish, high-profile gala in 2 weeks to celebrate their new Family Legacy Integrity division, headed by James Corvin. It was the kind of event my father would have been invited to. I certainly wasn't. But my gallery, we were framing a rare, expensive map for the event's silent auction, a donation from a client. I was the one managing the delivery and installation. It was my way in. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black dress and carried a toolkit, looking every bit the hired help. The venue was a museum of modern art, all gleaming surfaces and moneyed whispers. I saw Michael across the room, holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey, laughing with James Corvin. The sight made my stomach turn. They looked like partners, confident, victorious. I found Sophia Reyes by the registration desk, looking stressed as she coordinated last-minute name tags. I waited until she stepped away towards a quiet alcove, likely for a moment of peace. "Miss Reyes?" I said, keeping my voice low. She turned, a polite, professional mask on her face. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Clara Whitmore. Charles Whitmore was my father." The mask shattered. Her eyes flew wide with a mixture of shock, fear, and guilt. She knew exactly who I was. I'm so sorry for your loss," she stammered, the standard line sounding hollow. "I need 5 minutes, in private, please." I didn't plead, I stated it. It's about the Whitmore estate invoices and the Geneva account. Her face went pale. She glanced frantically around, then nodded towards a service door marked staff only. We slipped through into a stark concrete hallway filled with the hum of industrial freezers for the kitchen. "How do you know about that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know my father was paying blackmail for decades. I know James Corvin set up the structure, and I know the payments are still flowing, now authorized by my brother. You process those invoices, Sophia. You see the transfers." Tears welled in her eyes. I can't talk about this. I have a non-disclosure agreement. I could lose everything." "What about your conscience?" I asked, echoing the quote from her profile.
What about the cost of silencing it? My father is dead. I've been disinherited, but this machine is still running, sucking money out of what's left. Who is it going to? Who is Alara Duval paying? She shook her head, wrapping her arms around her. It's not going to Alara Duval. The hallway seemed to grow colder. What do you mean? The foundation in Liechtenstein, the disbursements? About 7 years ago, the beneficiary was changed. On Mr. Corvin's orders, the payments don't go to an individual anymore. She took a shaky breath, looking at me with profound pity. The payments go to a private medical facility, a long-term, high-security care facility just outside Geneva. A medical facility? For Alara? But if she needed lifelong care, that made sense. So she's still alive, and the money is for her care. That's almost honorable. Sophia's next words landed like blows. The facility, Miss Whitmore, it's not a hospital. It's a psychiatric institution, a locked ward. Alara Duval was admitted under a voluntary commitment at age 21. She's never left. My mind couldn't process it. She's institutionalized? She's catatonic, has been for years, non-responsive. The payments cover her custodial care, the bare minimum. Sophia's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. She's not a threat. She's not blackmailing anyone. She's a ghost. A ghost your father and Mr. Corvin pay to keep in a drawer. The revelation was more monstrous than I had imagined. This wasn't an active blackmail. It was a cover-up of a cover-up. They were hiding her existence, yes, but they were also hiding her condition. Why? Because a secret sick daughter was one thing. A secret mentally ill daughter, whose mother had been paid off, might be an even bigger legacy scandal. Then the final, devastating piece clicked. If the money is just for her basic care, where is the rest of it going? The millions my father paid originally, the ongoing fees to Corvin's firm. Sophia looked at the floor. I only see the invoices. The foundation pays the facility $15,000 a month. Vance and Crux bills the Whitmore estate $200,000 a month for legacy management. The math, it doesn't add up. No, it didn't. The blackmail wasn't coming from Geneva. It was coming from within. James Corvin had taken my father's secret and turned it into a perpetual parasitic revenue stream. He was charging the family to keep the secret from the family. And when my father finally balked, Corvin used his influence, perhaps threatening to expose Alara's plight and the whole sordid history, to get the will changed, ensuring Michael, a more pliable client, was in charge of the purse strings. I was erased because I would have asked the questions Sophia was too afraid to ask. I would have looked at the invoices. I would have gone to Geneva. I thanked Sophia, who made me promise never to reveal our conversation. I walked back into the glittering gala, the noise and light assaulting my senses. I looked at James Corvin, smiling his shark's smile, and at Michael, my brother, the golden child, now a puppet dancing on Corvin's strings. They had buried the truth in layers of money and lies. They thought that was the end of it, but I knew where the body was buried now, and it was time to start digging. The flight to Geneva was a blur. I moved on autopilot, driven by a compulsion I didn't fully understand. Sophia's revelation changed everything. Alara Duval wasn't a scheming blackmailer. She was a victim, locked away, a secret being used as a piggy bank. I couldn't confront Corvin or Michael yet. I had to see her. I had to look my father's secret in the eye. The facility, Les Cyprès, was not what I expected. It wasn't a grim asylum from a Gothic novel. It was a modern, low-slung building of glass and pale concrete, set in ruthlessly manicured gardens. It looked like a high-end spa or a silent retreat. The sterility of it was more chilling than decay. This was a place where secrets were neatly, expensively stored. I hadn't called ahead. What would I say? Hello, I believe my father may have been the father of your catatonic patient, whose existence he paid to hide, and I'd like a tour. I posed as a graduate student researching private healthcare models in Switzerland. A bored administrator gave me a pamphlet and a vague wave towards the gardens. The patients, who are ambulatory, often take supervised walks here in the afternoons, she said. So I waited on a bench, pretending to read, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The Geneva air was crisp, the Alps a majestic, indifferent backdrop to my personal earthquake. After an hour, a small group emerged, shepherded by 2 aides in soft blue uniforms. There were maybe 6 patients, moving slowly, some talking to themselves, others staring blankly.
And then I saw her. She was at the back, guided gently by a nurse. She was thin, her blonde hair lank and pulled into a simple ponytail. She wore gray sweatpants and a washed-out blue sweater. She was my age, but she seemed both older and terribly young. And despite a life of illness, medication, and isolation, I saw it. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. It was like looking at a ghost of myself, a version of me that had been shattered and left in a drawer. My breath caught. Every theoretical notion of a half-sister vaporized, replaced by the devastating human reality of her, Alara. She didn't look at the gardens or the sky. Her gaze was fixed on something internal and vast. The nurse led her to a bench not 10 feet from me and sat beside her, speaking in low, gentle French. I couldn't move. I just watched. The nurse, a woman with a kind, weathered face, opened a book, a collection of impressionist art prints. She began describing the paintings, pointing at the swirls of color. Regarde, Alara, les nymphéas de Monet, c'est l'eau et la lumière. And then something miraculous happened. Alara's hand, which had been lying limp in her lap, twitched. Slowly, slowly, her fingers reached out. They didn't point to the picture, but they hovered over it trembling. A soft, almost inaudible sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a word, it was a hum, a note of recognition. She was in there, trapped, buried under layers of trauma and psychosis, but present. The art had touched a thread of her consciousness. The nurse noticed my stare. She looked at me, not with suspicion, but with a deep, professional curiosity. I realized my face was wet with tears I hadn't felt falling. I quickly wiped them away, giving her a shaky, apologetic smile. When the aides rounded up the patients to go inside, the kind nurse lingered. She approached me. "You are not a student," she said in careful English. Her name tag read Anya. "No," I admitted, my voice thick. I think I'm her family, from America." Anya studied my face, her eyes moving from my eyes to her hair, seeing the resemblance I now felt was blazingly obvious. Her expression softened with a profound sadness. "I wondered if anyone would ever come. She has been here a very long time. The payments come, but the visitors never do." We walked a slow path along the garden's edge as she talked. She had been Alara's primary nurse for 8 years. Alara had been admitted by her mother, Isabel, shortly before Isabel died. The diagnosis was complex: severe trauma, a psychotic break, a retreat from a world that had been too painful. She was nonviolent, a silent soul floating in her own inner world. The facility provided safety, medication, basic care, but not healing, not love. "The foundation that pays for her," I asked carefully, "do they ever inquire? Do they ask for reports?" Anya shook her head. "Never, only that the payments are received on time. Once, about a year ago, the payment was late. I called the contact, a lawyer's office. A man was very angry. Not that she was not cared for, but that I had called. He said the payment was an administrative error and to never contact them again. The money arrived the next day." James Corvin, ensuring the secret stayed quiet, not ensuring Alara was well. "Has she ever spoken?" I asked, my heart aching. "A few words, here and there, sometimes about the colors.
Sometimes she says, maman, and once, Anya said, pausing, she said, l'argent, the money. She said it and began to cry. It was the only time I have seen her show strong emotion. The money, the source of her mother's desperation, her own captivity, my father's guilt, and now a lawyer's fortune. It had poisoned everything it touched. I asked if I could visit her officially. Anya helped me fill out the forms as a distant cousin. The next day, I sat in a sunroom with Alara. I didn't try to make her talk. I just sat with her. I brought a book of vibrant floral photography. I turned the pages slowly, narrating softly in English. This is a peony, so many layers of pink. This is a sunflower. It's like a piece of the sun. For an hour, she was still. Then, as I turned to a page of deep blue irises, her hand moved again, her index finger extended, not quite touching the page, tracing the air above the curve of a petal. Her lips parted. Bleu, she whispered. Blue. It was a single, fractured piece of a shattered person, but it was her. It was proof of life. And in that moment, any last thread of anger I held for my father melted away, replaced by a tidal wave of grief for him, for Isabel, for Alara, and for the monstrous system that had profited from our collective pain. My father hadn't disinherited me to punish me. He had done it in a final, twisted act of protection. He knew the vultures were circling. He knew the secret was a weapon. By cutting me off, he may have been trying to make me uninteresting to them, to push me out of the line of fire. He failed, because now I was in the very heart of it. And as I left Le Cypre that final day, Anya handed me a note. "The last payment from the foundation," she whispered. "It did not come this month. I am afraid to call. What will happen to her?" The machine was breaking down. With my father gone and me poking around, Corvin was getting nervous. He was cutting costs or preparing to disappear. He was going to abandon her. They had erased me from a will. They were planning to erase Alara from existence.
The hunt for truth was over. Now it was time for a war. I returned home with the fire of a new purpose. This was no longer about my inheritance. It was about justice for a forgotten woman and exposing the predator who fed on my family's shame. I had to move fast. If Corvin was stopping payments, he was in an endgame. He would loot what he could and vanish, leaving Alara to become a ward of the state, or worse. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed legal, official firepower. But going to the authorities with a convoluted story of secret sisters and Swiss accounts would get me nowhere. I needed to deliver Corvin to them on a platter, with the evidence tied in a bow. I thought of Mr. Alden, my father's old lawyer. His discomfort when he gave me the will wasn't just pity, it was guilt. He knew something was wrong. I requested a meeting, this time in a public place, a quiet corner of a busy hotel lobby. I needed neutral ground. "Mr. Alden," I began, cutting off his pleasantries, "I know about the Geneva account. I know about Alara Duval. I know James Corvin has been systematically draining my family's estate under the guise of managing that secret, and I know you suspected it." He deflated, the careful, lawyerly mask crumbling into weary despair. "Clara, your father was a proud man. When he came to me 6 months ago saying he wanted to cut off the Geneva drain for good, I was relieved. But then he brought in Corvin for specialist advice. I objected. Corvin's reputation, in certain circles, it's known. He's a fixer, not a fiduciary. Next thing I knew, your father was signing the new will. I believe Corvin threatened him, threatened to expose Alara's condition, to spin it in the press as your father abandoning a sick, illegitimate daughter. The scandal would have been nuclear. So he gave everything to Michael, thinking Michael could handle Corvin, or because Corvin had control over Michael already? Mr. Alden looked ill. I believe your brother is compromised. There are financial records I've seen, since I became the estate lawyer, of very large, unauthorized transfers from the company to offshore entities that trace back to Corvin's network. Michael signed off on them. I think Corvin has something on him too, or has promised him something. A kingdom in exchange for being a puppet. It all made sense. I need your help, I said, leaning forward. I need you to get me every single document related to Corvin's fees and those unauthorized transfers. I need a paper trail a prosecutor could follow in their sleep. And then I need you to call a meeting with Michael and Corvin. Tell them you've found discrepancies in the estate filings that need to be resolved before the final probate hearing, a legal stalling tactic. He was terrified. Clara, they'll ruin me. They'll have me disbarred. Or, I said softly, you can help me ruin them first. You can fulfill your actual duty to my father's legacy, not the money, but the truth. Help me protect the one part of his legacy that's still innocent, Ilara. The word duty struck a chord. He nodded grimly. What will you do? I'm going to the one person Corvin and Michael would never expect to be a threat. I'm going to give them a performance. While Mr. Alden gathered the financial evidence, I prepared my role. I became the defeated, broken daughter. I let my exhaustion show. I called Michael. I can't fight anymore, I said, my voice choked with fabricated tears. I want to understand, for my own peace. Can we talk, just you and me, at the lake house? One last time. The lake house, our childhood summer home, was sentimental, non-threatening. He agreed with the condescending grace of the victor. The next day, I arrived first. I placed my bag on the kitchen counter, a bag with my phone inside, recording audio, and a second, smaller device Mr. Alden had given me, a tiny, high-fidelity transmitter. He was in his car a mile down the road, listening, ready to call the authorities I had already briefed. Michael arrived, looking smug and pitying. I made coffee, my hands shaking for real this time. I played my part perfectly, the confused, grieving sister seeking closure. Why did he hate me so much, Michael? Just tell me that. Was it really just because I didn't join the company? He sighed, playing the magnanimous air. Clara, it wasn't hate. It was about stability, the company, the legacy. It needed a steady hand. With the complications, he felt you couldn't handle the pressure. Complications? I blinked innocently. He shifted, walking to the window overlooking the lake. The business world is brutal. There are always threats, liabilities. Dad had to make hard choices to protect what he built. Like the choices to pay James Corvin $200,000 a month? I let the number hang, dropping the pretense of ignorance. He froze, his back to me. The silence was deafening. He turned slowly, his face a mask of stunned alarm. What did you say? I've seen the invoices, Michael, the legacy management fees. I've been to Geneva. I've met Ilara. All the color drained from his face. The benevolent mask shattered, replaced by sheer panic, then a swift, calculated rage. You stupid, meddling little fool. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've uncovered the truth, that you and your lawyer friend are stealing from our father's estate, using a sick woman as your excuse. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Stealing? I'm saving it. Corvin has files, Clara. Audio, proof that Dad knew about Ilara's condition and intentionally kept her hidden to avoid the scandal.
If that got out, the shareholder backlash, the lawsuits, it would destroy Whitmore Industries. My job is to keep that from happening. Corvin provides a service. He contains the problem. So you pay him to keep the secret, and he lets you play CEO. And you threw me under the bus to make sure I didn't ask questions? It was necessary, he shouted, his composure gone. You with your morals and your questions, you would have blown it all up. Dad understood that in the end. He signed the will. He chose me to clean up his mess. And what about Ilara's payment this month? I asked quietly. It stopped. Is she part of the mess you're cleaning up? Are you going to let her fade away in some institution? His expression turned cold, pragmatic. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford. The Foundation's funds are being reallocated to legal defenses, to stability. He had just admitted on a live recording to conspiracy, fraud, and the intended abandonment of a vulnerable dependent. It was more than I'd hoped for. The front door opened. We both turned. James Corvin stood there, his cold eyes taking in the scene. He must have followed Michael, or Michael had alerted him. His smile was thin and dangerous. I had a feeling your sister's surrender was too neat. You should have left the grieving to the professionals, Clara. The game was up, but so was theirs. I looked at my brother, then at the lawyer. It's over. The authorities have all the financial records. Mr. Alden has been gathering them for weeks, and they're listening to this right now. Corvin's smile didn't waver. He actually chuckled. Authorities? To what? A family dispute over an estate? A poor, unstable girl in Geneva your father generously supported? You have a story, Clara. We have contracts, NDAs, and a signed will. You have nothing. I reached into my bag and took out my phone, stopping the recording. I held it up. I have this, and I have a nurse in Geneva named Anya who is ready to testify about the threatening call from your office when the payment was late. I have the director of Les Cyprès who will confirm the payments have stopped and that the only contact for Ilara Duval for 20 decades has been your firm. And now I have my brother, the executor of the estate, on tape admitting the payments are hush money and that he plans to reallocate funds meant for her care. For the first time, a crack appeared in James Corvin's icy calm. He took a step toward me. But he never took a second. The sound of tires on gravel, lots of them, echoed outside. Through the window, we saw 3 unmarked cars and 2 police cruisers pull up. Mr. Alden stepped out of the first car, along with 2 serious-looking men in suits from the Financial Crimes Unit. I looked at my brother. His face was a portrait of utter ruin. "It's not about the will anymore, Michael," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "It's about what you did to protect it." The lake house, once a place of childhood innocence, became a crime scene. The next few hours were a surreal blur of statements, questions, and the satisfying click of handcuffs. James Corvin was arrested on the spot for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Michael was taken in for questioning. His status as CEO and executor provided no shield from the stark evidence Mr. Alden and I provided. I stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket an officer had given me, watching as my brother was led to a car. He didn't look at me. The golden child was tarnished forever. His kingdom was built on sand, and the tide had finally come in. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and private reckonings. With Michael suspended and Corvin in custody, the board of Whitmore Industries appointed an interim CEO. The forensic audit, triggered by our evidence, uncovered the full scope of the theft. Millions had been funneled through Corvin's network of shell companies and foundations. The Geneva account was not just for Ilara's care, it was a slush fund, and Corvin had been the sole beneficiary for years, with Michael either complicit or willfully blind. The press had a field day. Whitmore Hare implicated in fraud scandal, secret sister revealed in bizarre inheritance battle. I refused all interviews. My fight wasn't for headlines. It was for a quiet room in Switzerland and a silenced woman. With Mr. Alden's help, I petitioned the court to be appointed Ilara's legal guardian. Given my status as her half-sister and the role I played in exposing the conspiracy, the request was granted. The first thing I did was use a small portion of my personal savings, not a dime of the contested estate, to reinstate and double the payments to Les Cypres, with direct oversight from a new independent fiduciary. Anya cried with relief when I called her.
But guardianship was just a piece of paper. The real work was harder. I returned to Geneva every month. I sat with Ilara, I read to her, I showed her my own photographs of the lake house, of the old oak tree, of clouds that looked like paintings. I spoke of our mother, Isabel, not as a secret or a problem, but as a brilliant woman who loved her. I never mentioned our father. That wound was too complicated, too shaded with guilt and pain. She needed peace, not more ghosts. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a fragile connection formed. She began to anticipate my visits, her eyes tracking me when I entered the sunroom. One afternoon, as I described a photo of a sunset, her hand moved, not to trace the air, but to rest, feather light on top of mine. It was the first intentional touch she had initiated in over a decade. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the warmth of her skin seep into mine. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, then mine. No words, just a shared, silent understanding that she was not alone anymore. Back home, the legal machinery ground on. Michael, in a desperate bid for leniency, agreed to a plea deal. He testified against Corvin, detailing how the lawyer had gradually ensnared him, first with offers to manage the Geneva problem, then with veiled threats, and finally with promises of unfettered control if he played along. He was sentenced to 18 months in a white-collar facility and was forced to resign from the company permanently. All assets he had acquired with the misdirected funds were forfeited. James Corvin received a much harsher sentence. The scope of his fraud, spanning multiple clients and millions of dollars, was laid bare. He was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The predator was caged. And then there was the will. With Michael convicted of crimes related to the estate, the original will was effectively voided. The probate court had to decide. Mr. Alden argued passionately that my father's final amendments were made under duress and fraud, orchestrated by Corvin. The judge agreed. The final ruling came down on a bright, clear Tuesday. The last will and testament of Charles Whitmore was set aside. The previous version, written 5 years prior, would stand. In that will, the estate was split evenly between his 2 children, Michael and me. I sat in the courtroom, hearing the words, and felt nothing like triumph. The money, the houses, the shares, they felt like artifacts from a life that wasn't entirely mine anymore. They were tainted by the battle, but they were also tools. I made my decision public immediately. I would accept my half of the inheritance, but I would not keep it. The press called it the Whitmore reversal. I called it the beginning. I established the Duval Whitmore Foundation. Its mandate was clear: to provide funding and advocacy for individuals with severe, long-term mental health conditions, particularly those who have fallen through the cracks of family and system. The cornerstone endowment was my entire inheritance. The foundation's first permanent resident and beneficiary was Ilara Duval. We moved her out of Les Cypres, not to my world, which would have been too harsh and unfamiliar, but to a purpose-built,
beautiful and peaceful care home in the Swiss countryside, funded by the foundation, and run on principles of dignity, connection, and expert, compassionate care. Anya came with her, as head of her personal care team. Her new room has a wall of windows facing a garden designed to bloom with color year-round. I visit for a week every month. We have a routine. Mornings in the garden, afternoons with art, sometimes viewing, sometimes simple, sensory-based creating, evenings listening to music. She will likely never have a conventional life. She may never speak in full sentences, but she is safe, she is loved, she is seen. The money that was used to hide her is now used to honor her existence. As for the rest of the family legacy, I sold my shares in Whitmore Industries. I used the capital to expand the foundation's work. The company, under new leadership, is trying to rebuild its reputation. It's no longer my concern. My brother and I do not speak. He served his time and lives abroad under a different name. Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. The best you can hope for is indifference, and I have reached that shore. I mourn the brother I thought I had, not the man he became. The lake house? I kept it. It's the only physical thing I wanted. I had it renovated, airing out the ghosts. It's now a retreat for caregivers supported by the foundation, a place for them to find rest and restoration. The old oak tree still stands, and beneath it I placed a simple, unmarked stone bench. It's not a memorial to my father. It's a place to sit and remember that even the strongest trees have roots in complicated, sometimes dark soil. One afternoon, about a year after Alara moved to her new home, I was sitting with her. She was working with a therapist, using soft pastels on large sheets of paper. She wasn't drawing pictures, just moving color in broad, sweeping strokes, blues and greens, the colors of the lake and the trees. I was content to just watch. Then she paused. She looked at her hands, stained with blue, then slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. Her gaze was clearer than I had ever seen it. It held a universe of unspoken history and pain, but also a glimmer of recognition, of connection. She lifted her hand, the one smudged with pastel, and reached toward me, not to touch me, but to point, very deliberately, at my heart. Then she looked back at her paper, at the swirl of blue, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was her way of saying she understood, that she knew I was her sister, that we were connected by more than just the tragedy and the money. We were connected by the aftermath, by the choice to build something gentle out of the wreckage. That was the moment I truly understood my father's final, failed act. In cutting me out, he wasn't rejecting me. He was trying, in his own proud, stubborn, and deeply flawed way, to throw a cloak over me, to make me uninteresting to the vultures so I could fly away, free of the toxic legacy. He failed because he underestimated the very thing he thought was my weakness, my heart, my need for truth, for connection, for real justice. That heart led me into the storm, but it also led me to my sister. It led me to a purpose. So if there's a moral to this story, it's this. The most shocking revenge is not destruction, it's transformation. They tried to erase me with a pen stroke. They tried to erase Alara with silence and money. And in doing so, they handed us the power to rewrite the entire story. We took the ink meant for deletion and used it to draw a new world. You can be written out of a will, but you cannot be written out of your own life. Your legacy isn't what's left for you in a document, it's what you choose to build from the pieces they left behind. My father's legacy was an empire of industry, shadowed by secrets. Mine is a quiet room in Switzerland, where a forgotten woman finally feels the sun on her face and knows, deep in her soul, that she is home. And that is a victory no court could ever award and no amount of money could ever buy.